This is the GetRx Builder Series half rack and functional trainer. It's designed to be the centerpiece of your home gym, and the name says it all. With two 200-pound stacks and separate trolleys, it's a promising cable machine, and you can get pretty creative with it too. You can start with just the rack in various configurations, then add on the cables, storage, and literally dozens of other things later on. But for as much potential as it has, and it is pretty good, they are packing a lot of functionality into a small footprint, but there's also some questionable design choices keeping this from being a knock out of the park. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen someone integrate cables into racks. There's the dialed motion systems, Reps Aries and Athena, and to be honest, just about every major manufacturer is going to offer a rack cable system soon if they don't already, and we've got reviews of a few of them lined up, so subscribe for those, but we're about to find out if this one stands out from the crowd. I've been using this as my primary rack for a few weeks now, and in that time I've run it through all my typical workouts and have mostly come away impressed. But don't worry, I still did all my typical antics, which I can afford to do since GetRx sent me this for free for the review. So I tried to flip it and luckily failed, tested the weight capacity of the cables, which I still have no idea what they are, and put it through dozens of exercises to see how it held up. If you enjoy our content and decide to make a purchase of this or any of the products we're going to compare it to, like Reps Aries or Athena, which we own both of, then please use our affiliate links that are in the video's description, as that's how we keep this channel going. As you can see, I opted for the half rack because someone in this gym seems to have a small obsession with equipment and it's getting a little crowded in here. This is part of GetRx Builder series of racks. That's their 3x3 11-gauge steel racks with 1-inch holes, which puts them in line with racks like Reps PR5000 and Rogue's Monster Rack. That means it's their premium top-of-the-line rack, and it's got to compete with everyone else's, which means I'm going to be pretty harsh in this review as I compare it to other 3x3 racks. GetRx has done a great job on giving you options, as they have an almost overwhelming amount of ways you can build these. There's a 4-post and 6-post. You can mount it to your wall in various ways, add a lat pull down. I mean, you can get pretty wild with it, and that's just scratching the surface. They're not lacking in options or versatility. We added a dual landmine to ours, their spotter arms, and the storage. Just ignore the height. I set these up for me and kind of forgot about one important and very small factor, my wife. But we've got a few other things on here, and their rack attachment ecosystem is pretty impressive with monoliths, lever arms, and dozens of other accessories, though there's some odd omissions, like where's the leg rollers? I will admit my favorite part of pull downs is when you've become so strong you can float and fly in the air, and I can just use another company's rollers since this rack's using 1-inch holes, but it still seems like an obvious item to have. But that's not what I was alluding to when I mentioned questionable design choices earlier. Before I go crazy picking this thing apart, just realize that overall I do think this is pretty well done. It has the best build quality I've seen from GetRx. The pulleys are very smooth, it's stable and solid as a rock, and as we'll see, it's priced well too. So watch until the end and I'll eventually show quite a bit of love for it, but I built this channel on brutally honest, in-depth reviews, and I'm not stopping now, so here we go. I love 3x3 racks. If you have the budget for one, their modularity makes them future-proof, and they can be built off of and added onto in absurd ways. I know this one idiot with an 11-post rack where he not only put a functional trainer on his main rack, but he built off the side, attaching Rogue and Rep components and attached an Aries as well. Of course, I'm that idiot, and you probably already knew that since it's the backdrop of most of my videos, but one look at that build shows the versatility of 3x3 systems. Is it unnecessary? Maybe, but the possibilities are endless. There's quite a few storage solutions on there, there's a basketball hoop, and a lot of other attachments on that rack. So what does that 3x3 build have to do with this? GetRx isn't quite following the norm with their Builder Series rack measurements. Yes, it's 3x3 with 1-inch holes, which is the industry standard, but after that, things get a little wonky. You see, from about 10 to 70 inches, they're using 1-inch holes, but above and below that, it's 1/2 inch. Why does that matter? My Rogue Monster rack is probably a good example because I store my leg rollers on the top of the rear crossmember, my spotter arms on the sides, extra J-cups up top, and don't forget the Darko dock holding some bars in the front. None of that would work with this rack because of the change in hole sizes, nor would my 11 post build because swapping components between now becomes a little trickier. Sure, I can use other 3x3 attachments on this because of the 1-inch holes, so you'll see me using a lot of different ones throughout this video, but for whatever reason, GetRXd is using 1.5-inch hole spacing on the uprights rather than the standard 2 inches. And when you've got two holes this close together, it's sometimes hard to know which one you're putting it into. It is nice they've numbered every other hole, but most others mark every hole on their 1-inch racks. Also, that 1.5-inch hole spacing means if you're using an attachment that uses more than one pin, like surplus strength's stealth spotter arms, that second hole probably won't line up. Speaking of odd measurements, this rack is about 42.5 inches wide on the inside. I say about because while I'm pretty sure I can use a tape measure, this is a metric rack. That means just like with other imported racks, they're not measuring and manufacturing in inches, but they have to tell us inches because we're Americans and we don't really understand. But Titan and Rep are 41 inches, Rogue and Bells of Steel are 43, and this is neither. That matters if you're swapping components between, like trying to put these storage shelves on another rack. It can be done, but you'll need some spacers or to get a little creative. That same idea applies with putting an attachment that's manufactured to customary measurements like Rogue's on this. It'll fit, but it'll be a little bit loose because these uprights are actually a little bit smaller than 3 inches, but metric attachments should fit perfectly fine outside of the hole spacing. Last thing I should mention, though it's not often a factor, but GetRX's 4-way hole spacing has the holes in line with each other like Sorinex does, rather than offset like most others. Alright, I've picked on GetRXd enough for the moment, and while I've got a few more things I'll pick on them for, I do like this setup. My 4-post setup is pretty compact, and the shelves don't affect the footprint like it would with Reps Athena, where the storage has to be pushed back. And I've been able to do every exercise I've tried on this. I've done rack pulls and it hasn't budged, there's enough space to incline bench, and there's no issues fitting a spotter back there. Well, kind of. With any of these systems where you're blocking off the side of the rack with a functional trainer, you've got to do some kind of spotter magic to get back there, but we can't really hold that against GetRXd. There's always going to be trade-offs when you try to do so much in a tiny little space. And they are packing a ton of features into this, with touches like the knurled handles on the trolleys, integrated band pegs on the weight stacks, and the optional add-ons like the functional trainer and storage. Alright, so we've established it can basically do it all, but how well? Let's start with the cables, and I'm going to compare it to Reps Athena because we have a Rep build that's almost identical to this with storage, dual selectorized cables, and everything else except it's a 6-post. So if you want to see that review, hit that subscribe button, but both companies are trying to do the same thing, pack as much versatility into as small a space as possible. And I will admit, I am a little bit surprised with how well GetRX's functional trainer actually works, for the most part. What I mean by that is this is less expensive than a comparable Rep build, and a lot of the time cheaper prices means it doesn't work as well. But this cable system has a very smooth pull because the aluminum pulleys have high quality bearings inside them, and that really is the most important factor. If there's a hitch or resistance in the cables, pulleys, or trolleys, which happens oddly often on other systems, the whole thing suffers. Here we've got a 2-to-1 pulley ratio, which gives us plenty of cable travel for any exercise. These are 200-pound weight stacks, but that 2-to-1 ratio means every 10-pound plate feels like 5 pounds. That means the stacks start at 5 pounds and go up in 5-pound increments up to 100 pounds. If you're worried about going heavier, I've been combining the stacks with my Darko Longy bar for pull downs and other exercises, but you could use band pegs or even a gym pin to add more weight. Either way, it's still a heavier weight stack than the Athena, and even if you upgrade the Athena's weight stack, you're only gaining 10 pounds over GetRx'd. I would prefer that the stickers on the weight stack said the actual weight you're feeling rather than what they weigh, because gym math is hard when you're tired, but I do appreciate the ego boost, and I'm not telling my neighbors that I'm not actually curling 200 pounds. Overall, I think they've done very well with the cables, but changing the height on the trolley is a little clunky. You've got a mag pin, and it is a nice pin and not difficult to move the trolleys, but with the 1/2-inch holes up top, you're using a different size pin up there. When compared to Rep's Athena or the Aries, where you've got an integrated pop pin, that's just a simpler and quicker system. Is it nitpicking? Probably, but even if this is cheaper, that doesn't mean it's cheap, so let's nitpick. I think every company's rack-integrated functional trainers should place the pull point of the trolleys on the outside of the upright, because we all know how important every inch is when you're trying to get that stretch at home. We've seen Dialed Motion do it with their Ibex and Sidewinder cable system, and Rep is following suit with their Aries 2.0. I'm sure if we see an Athena 2.0, that'll change too. Now, I'm not super passionate about width like some people are with their functional trainers, so I don't mind. I just think we should maximize what's already here. But if you are passionate, GetRx does make a 6-foot wide version of this. So where does that leave the Builder rack and its ecosystem versus an equivalent PR5000 Rep Athena setup? This is about $1,000 less. Granted, this thing is pretty loaded up with the storage and the clear coat uprights, and I love clear coat. I think GetRx has done a good job with ours. It just makes for a very pretty rack. Anyway, it's a sizable savings between them, at least built like we have. The functional trainers are about $200 less through GetRx, though Rep does have a plate-loaded option. GetRx doesn't yet. The Sandwich J-Cups save you about $50. But as a generalization, I'd say GetRx is cheaper, but Rep's build quality and attachments are better quality. Luckily, the racks are pretty compatible, so you've got a lot of options if you find something on one you don't like. A good example, or maybe a bad example, because I hate GetRx versions, are the spotter arms. This design is terrible. With Reps, you just twist them to get them on and off. Makes sense, super simple. With these, because of the mount, you have to pivot them way up to get the pin in or out. And if you've already set up the bar and have to adjust the spotters during bench, for example, your J-cups are now in the way and you can't. And honestly, I'd almost rather choose death at that point rather than rearrange anything. Outside of those though, I'm happy with this rack. I think it does a lot in a small space, and it does it well. Sure, there's a few odd design elements that keep this from being fantastic, but I think this is a very good rack system for the right person. Thank you to our patrons for helping us keep this dream alive. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.